Hotep, greetings. Welcome to day 2 of the African American Experience. I'm going to start with a commercial. And that commercial is a plug for English 151, which is Black American Literature, if you need more classes in your schedule. It's being taught by Dr. Sarah Lucia, who's relatively new to Lane. But the Black American Literature class is actually an old fixture from dating back to the 70s, so various people have taught it. So it talks about, and I'll just read this, Black American Literature students will critically engage a variety of texts which include a range of books, advertisements, music, art, and multimedia. We will discuss the social, political, historical, cultural, linguistic, geographic, and economic factors that frame the creation of various Black American texts, deepening our understanding of Black American history, culture, and language. So, those of you who are here on the first day, one of the things I talk about in terms of the class is being able to write and read. And basically, we're reading authors written, basically Black authors, and many of them are classic. But if you didn't know that they were classic, and that's part of what the extra credit assignment is, because Molefe is definitely one of the classic ones that are contemporary to now, and the people that he cites, while some of them have become ancestors, i.e. have died, their work still stands. And basically one of the things that Sarah is trying to do in terms of updating this is not just simply looking at print books, but looking at all types of media, because all types of media inform our understanding of what it is to be part of the African American experience, which is also not just limited to this continent, as this course will basically show you. So just to explain what I mean by that, in so-called Latin America, there are 130 million Black people. Okay, so in other words, there are more Black people in Latin America than there are in America. So whether you knew this fact or not, it is a fact, and part of the history is why we are basically kind of so American-centric within our particular educational system to not understand that whole global thing. Our relationship with Cuba. Cuba has always been a bastion of slaves rebelling. Always, since the Civil War days and before. All right, and that's part of our history with that has been people rebelling for freedom. And with, especially with the whole piece with the Castro brothers and the Castros, Che Guevara, all these other folks being part of that revolution. So whether Sarah will get into that or not doesn't matter, just another class for your edification. So just to explain the extra credit, the first week extra credit piece, the history of Africa, the quest for eternal harmony. So read, even though it does say close of business 10/6, that was from when we were going to be running in fall. It's actually close of business a week from today, which is 5 o'clock on the 14th, January 14th, just before Martin's birthday. So you read the frontispiece in the book, the dedication page, look up in particular the first and last names referenced on the list of dedication acknowledgments. So basically these are his teachers, and particularly he also references other African historians, and also then be able to define the difference between hominids and pongids and all life forms referred to in italics on page 351 in the book. Now, there's a reason I'm sending you on this sleuthing mission, all right? So writing is thinking, all right? And so understand that your thoughts have been shaped by the format of language. And so the more language you speak, the more flexible your programming becomes, if you will. All right? And so expanding your vocabulary is a key piece. Now, often growing up, one of the things that happened in my life is that, I was, raised in a family of kind of rebels, but they went to school. So I wasn't going to necessarily go to my high school graduation, but my father sat me down and said, no, you're going to your high school graduation because you're the third person in our family to graduate high school since slavery. What? Yeah. Third person in our family to graduate high school since slavery. So knowing that, our family came from the South, we're 3 generations of sharecroppers, 4 generations ago we were slaves. Reading was a death sentence if you were a slave, but we were the slaves that taught each other how to read when it was a death sentence. So my father learned to read at 2, I learned to read at 4, before we got to school. So reading was a big thing for me. He also basically was old school enough to say, you will read Du Bois, you will read Fanon, you will read black authors. You will read. And you will speak the king's English better than the king, you will know the king's history better than the king. So, a lot of times, especially with some of my neighbors, oh, you're talking white. Wait, talking like W.E. Du Bois is talking white? Who brainwashed you? Where'd you get the idea slaves were stupid? And so then, in putting together this class, what I'm teaching you is what I was taught. Basically, the books, some of the books, even though they may or may not have been written, but this is what I grew up with in that particular worldview. Like, what I said the other day. Slaves coming to the Americas spoke a minimum of 3 to 4 languages. And if they were Jewish or Muslim and or the African forms of Christian, they were also literate. Coming here. So understand, slavery is an economic condition in which you are forced to work for free, regardless of what you did before. So you could have been a doctor, or a lawyer, or a teacher, or a priest in Africa and just basically captured and sold into slavery, and you weren't allowed to use those skills. So otherwise, what would happen in America is that you would not necessarily be taught that in the slavery question, right? So that's why part of why we started 15,000 explain, okay, how do you produce people who even as slaves can come over here literate in America? So, Sarah's class, so the extra credit. The dedications to Sheikh Anta Diop, Ali Masri, Egyptopithecus, and all the other italicized life forms, hominids and pongids. So what I want you to do in reading all that is basically be able to draw a line in language that makes sense to you. Like, if this is the first time you've been exposed to that particular information or thought about it, well, what does that mean to you? And how do you apply it to today? And also you have a reaction paper due next Wednesday too.
Can you let me get the first slide?
Yeah. All right. So from this book, The History of Africa. Now, sorry if it's expensive, but you should be starting a library. No, you really should. Now, previous editions of this class from a decade ago, they're, in particular, maybe you don't understand what the implication of having a class like this at Lane Community College, but it is a tradition that was started by student activism, black student activism, and other black students working with other students to create a curriculum to talk about, oh, well, here we are. And so then it was destroyed, and then we brought it back in the late 90s, and so black authors, black thought, but not just black people, but being able to relate to other folks as well. So the extra credit is basically look at the dedications and all the other things and be able to identify the life forms. Because there are people, and there have been people in the class that have basic, well, I believe, my faith teaches me that, the world started 6,000 years ago. Well, okay. The science doesn't, okay, you use a cell phone and the science that created the cell phone doesn't believe that. So how do you deal with that? Well, what do you mean? Well, it's quantum physics, which is not in the Bible as far as I know. Well, maybe it is, the water into wine thing, but okay, anyway. All right, so extra credit explained. Did you get all that?
Not the second
All right, well, it'll be up. You'll get it. This is one of the Adinkra symbols. This is a symbol that we use on our Rites of Passage t-shirts here, the summer youth program we hear. Nia onim nosua aohu, which basically means he who does not know can know from learning. And it's a symbol of knowledge, lifelong education, and a continued quest for knowledge. Now this is an alphabet. Now you don't necessarily make this alphabet. So the character on your screen right is an Adinkra symbol, which is part of an alphabet of about 60 some odd characters. And the familiar, at least familiar to you if you speak English, the Latin characters, so-called because they came from the Romans. The Latin characters basically are a translation of that. So understand that all alphabets you don't necessarily make sentences with like we're used to in English, like the Latin characters. Just seeing the symbol and knowing the story behind it basically captures thought and language just like the words in English do. But you have to know the backstory. Yeah?
So the symbol could really reflect a paragraph.
Yes, it could be. So for example, I'll give you an example of that. So what is that?
Peace sign.
The peace sign. So what does it mean?
Peace, or peace.
Okay, so if you didn't know, so there's a backstory to that symbol. All right? The backstory is it's semaphore. Okay? Semaphore is an alphabetical language using flags before ships had radio and cell phones and all that other kind of stuff, or video. They signal each other by waving flags. This symbol is the symbol for N and D. Nuclear disarmament. Okay, that's why it's the peace symbol. Okay, ND in semaphore. Same idea with an alphabet, right? So you have a picture, not only that tells 1,000 words, but there's a concept, right? Nuclear disarmament came out of Britain. Part of the anti-war movement and was adopted later. So this piece, the Adinkra symbols, the Akan Adinkra symbols, and I think there are some at the link that's here, www.adinkra.org, because new ones are being created, but the Akan are a tribal group in Ghana. And the Adinkra symbols have been around for quite a long time, and there's a story behind each one of them. So a lot of times you'll see them, for example, associated with Kwanzaa, and some look like a heart, and there's one next to the Jinyame, which is basically two crocodiles which share one stomach, sometimes known as Siamese crocodiles. Basically, there's ones where basically this image here is basically two fish biting each other's tails, saying we shouldn't be biting each other's tails. This is a fern, this jinyame, It's one of a particular favorite of people depicted in art and jewelry. It represents the turning universe. So that particular Adinkra symbol, Jinyame, means that there's a simple translation, except God. So the idea is it represents the turning of the universe. No one was around to see the beginning of the universe except God. Nobody would be around to see the end of the universe except God. So that's why you should accept God. And there's a third meaning, except for God, I fear nothing. Okay, so the Adinkra symbol, Jinyame, basically talks about, it symbolizes the omnipotence of God. Right? So, all those simultaneously, one symbol. So again, alphabet, got to know the backstory. Not putting it together in a sentence, but knowing the backstory, knowing the history. Sometimes you will see like this symbol, Sankofa, which means go back and fetch it. Go back and fetch your history. As a heart. Symbolize the history you need to feel in your heart.
It looks like there's roots on the bottom.
Yes. Yeah. So, ethnic studies is that branch of academe which concerns itself with non-white humanity as a scholarly discipline. Now, the reason I put it this way, the reason we define it that way is just like we were talking about the other day. You go into a grocery store and there's usually like an ethnic food section. And you walk in there and you see tortillas and salsa and maybe some Italian pasta stuff. And okay, that's ethnic food, but like mayonnaise isn't ethnic food? Like, so the assumption there, kind of play with your mind. Who's an ethnic and who's not? Right? So, and why isn't ethnic studies included in the regular curriculum? Right? So when I was talking about the other day, Afrocentric, not just being concerned with black people, but basically telling the story from the point of view of everybody that was there. If you can know it. So not just telling Columbus's side of the story, but, let's talk about the Tainos part of the story, too. Like, why were they so open and accepting of this guy who said, I could enslave you guys in first contact? And they're thinking, wow, this must be the good white brother we heard about who was here 2,800 years ago. Not so much. So, modern ethnic studies arose out of student activism in the 60s. As a continued reaction to the traditional canon of Western civilization. Now, when I say modern ethnic studies, I'm talking about post-World War II, or what we call postmodernism, if you're in anthropology. So the idea, just so you know, because we're coming up on it, Negro History Week. Okay, so I'm going to dispel a myth. If you had a myth about where Black History Month came from, and don't be complaining about it being the shortest month of the year and blah, 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 okay? Here's where it came from. Historian Carter Woodson basically said, okay, we need to talk about the history of what has happened to us here. And we need to understand the contrasts of living in America, the African American experience, except we weren't called African Americans then, we were called Negro. So I'm old enough to remember at 60, when we were called Negro and when being called black was an insult. right? So it was Negro History Week, and basically it was the week in February that bookended Frederick Douglass's birthday and Lincoln's birthday. And it was celebrated internally. That is internal to black culture. So, you know, the magazines, the NAACP crisis or whatever, basically we're going to focus on our history this week. And part of the reason that we're looking at Frederick Douglass and Lincoln is not because Lincoln, quote unquote, freed the slaves. Well, no, he didn't, really. We helped free ourselves with agitation, and he just did something politically expedient. Because, as an example, so Frederick Douglass versus Lincoln. So Lincoln was the first American president to host a delegation of free black leaders. He was the first American president to do that. Okay, and there were free black people from the beginning of the country, though the majority were in slavery. So he calls a delegation of free black people, including Frederick Douglass. And basically, it wasn't to listen to what their concern was. It was basically to say, this is before the Civil War. Okay, this slavery thing is going to tear the country apart. So here's my proposal. Let's ship all the black people to Costa Rica to avoid the Civil War. And Douglas goes, and the others go, what? No, we're not interested in that. And also, about 3 months before his death, Lincoln proposed that again. And this time, one of his generals said, Mr. President, even if we were to take all the ships in existence, which we don't control, first of all, but all the ships in our Navy and all the ships in the Merchant Marine, and put all the black people on them, we can't fit all the black people on them. That's one. But if we could do that, then ship them to Costa Rica. Take them all down where Florida, get on the, Gulf of Mexico side, et cetera, the Atlantic side. By the time the ships come back empty, the blacks that we have left will have replaced the ones that you took in terms of population. By the way, we don't have the money. So there could be a simpler solution. To understand, in terms of politics, there's a reason why, for example, the first black Republican who was elected to the Senate since Reconstruction just died, Mr. Brooks. There's a reason why black people were Republicans, because the Republicans were the party of Lincoln. And Lincoln freed the slaves, et cetera, et cetera. Lincoln was himself a moderate. Okay, so the solution to slavery, real simple. Free the slaves. That was the radical Republicans, which we will learn about later this term. That's the first use of the term radical. Okay, the radical Republicans wanted this. 1, end slavery now. 2, educate the slaves. 3, give the slaves compensation either in cash or 40 acres and a mule for their labor. 4, give them the vote. 5, eliminate any law that doesn't make them full American citizens equal to whites. Now that was radical. Okay? End white supremacy. And this is like some of the proponents were not just black, they were white people saying this. And that was depicted in the film Lincoln, but notice in the film Lincoln, Spielberg, the alleged history buff, doesn't start his film with that meeting with Douglas. He starts his film just before Lincoln gets killed. So left out of the whole conversation is his wanting to ship all black people to Costa Rica, even though that's in the historical record. So here's what the danger is, and this is why I insist you read books. Because if you rely on movies, Hollywood, to teach you your history, you're not going to get it all. Even if it is a black filmmaker, you might not be allowed to get it all, right? So, this is part of ethnic studies. So when we deal with ethnic studies, we're not just talking about history. We're using history as a framework because that's how we think sequentially, but we're also bringing in politics, economics, and all other sciences that humans are endeavoring to. So, ethnic studies versus the traditional canon. So, the traditional canon, as I was talking about the other day, Columbus discovered America, that narrative. Slavery, and so part of, if that's where you start, Columbus discovered America, then if you, how many of you have taken logic in philosophy?
Taking philosophy.
Okay. I confess that I challenged the logic final to get out of my math requirement in undergrad. Probably can't do that anymore. But one of the things that logic does, it has its own symbolic language, which means a certain logical proposition. So for example, then, A is a logical proposition. Let's say that A is Columbus discovered America. Then B is the next logical conclusion after that. And then C. Right? Now, there is an A prime in logic. Okay? Which basically is the logical proposition before you get to A. Usually left out of the conversation, but it does exist. A prime. Okay? Columbus discovered America. If that's A, well, wait. So A prime would be, well, who was there before? How did you discover? Wait, discovery means there ain't nobody there, but there's somebody there. So A prime starts with the Taino. That's where ethnic studies starts. The A prime, which is usually left out of. So the traditional canon, A, Columbus discovered America. Go back to slide, please. B and C, slavery and Christianity brought civilization, that's C, to savage Africa, America, Asia, Oceania. Okay? Because just like we were talking about on Monday with the doctrine of discovery, that is, it's a legal principle that basically says, oh, when Christianity, because C could also be a form of Christianity, when Christianity got brought to those folks, we're bringing civilization to you. And what the Bible says is that you are supposed to serve us, because we're in God's image. And so you're supposed to be slaves and serve us, and be a good slave. Now, when I'm saying that, it's like, okay, understand when you're working off of the King James Version of the Bible, instead of the original versions of the Bible written by Africans, who do not define themselves as cursed by God, that's why they're black. And in the adherents of the King James Version, they do say that. Not making that up. Oh, we can't, God made the races separate, so we can't mix. The Bible says so. Yeah, where does it say that? Oh, because the children of Ham, because Ham saw Noah in his bath, and that was disrespecting Noah, so Ham was black, and so everybody that came after Ham, the children of Ham, i.e. black people, they're cursed by God. You say what? Because Noah's son saw his daddy in the bath? And that's why we cursed? And you believe that? Okay, well, God said it. And God said that the slave should be a good, obedient slave to their master no matter what their master does. And then you get into heaven. Right. I'm sorry. I'm skeptical. Because I was raised to be skeptical. So, Slavery and Christianity brought civilization to savage Africa, America, Asia, and Oceania. D, A, B, C, D, democracy came from Greece and Rome. Right? Still, that logic still is following, right? You can see how the principle is built on it. And so then the traditional canon of Western civilization is the most enlightened and superior human civilization ever, and it arose from Greco-Roman democracy through Europe, and finally culminating in the United States of America. Feel free to challenge me on this, okay? So you can see the logic being reinforced throughout the school system. And this particular logic is about 700 years old. Okay? Which, of course, is why it's our job to bring democracy to the world. That is America. America's form of democracy. So, the implications being our form of democracy is the oldest and bestest form. Yeah, I know, bestest ain't a word, but you feel me on that. Okay? So, ethnic studies then kind of challenges that, saying, okay, look, here's some other historical facts that you kind of left out of the story, that hero was the teller of the tale story, that maybe you should kind of look at before you make your conclusions. Because you're making policy decisions based on this. This isn't just some wacky idea that we can just poo-poo in the 21st century. No, they're still alive today, very much so. So, Greco-Roman democracy with its Senate. So, for example, if we're talking about now governance, who was in the Senate and who was not? Who was a citizen and who was not? So, the meme, how many of you are familiar with that term, meme? Okay, good. 10 years ago, people thought it was crazy, even though the term has been in existence since '86, which is when I started using it after reading the book that defined it. Okay, so the meme, virus of the mind, right? So it doesn't have to be, a meme doesn't have to be true, it's just successful or not, right? But you have to know how it's constructed to actually diffuse it and take it apart. So that meme, only moneyed, educated, quote unquote, education is in quotes because the illusion of a school is that, just like the illusion of the internet. So I want you to, be hip to what media you consume. The illusion of the school and the illusion of the internet, because they relate to each other, is that all human knowledge is in them. And everything you need to know is in your education, being taught in a classroom or in a book. And if it ain't in there, it ain't important. So, only moneyed, educated men are citizens, therefore eligible for the Senate and to be Caesar or Praetor. No female rulers. And even other pagan societies like Greek and Rome. So pagan means you worship multiple gods, polytheistic, etc. So other pagan societies had queens. Even Christian societies had queens. And since this was the model of Rome and Greece, as far as we're told in the traditional canon, it therefore becomes the model for American democracy. Okay? It's ancient, it works for us, that is, we the people, us. And who's we the people? Right? Therefore, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Or if we do fix it, we're going to fix it slow. So, great. Now we allow women to be senators but not president. Now we allow black people to be president, but grudgingly. Make trouble for them. So African and slash indigenous democracy. So when you're indigenous to a place, that means, and here's what I'm going to define as if you're native to a place, then your people have been there for 100 generations, preferably 1,000, if you're native. Okay, so generations 20 years, 100 generations, 2,000 years. You're native to that place. Or 20,000. Pick one. But if you've been there less than that, you're a newcomer. Now, I'm not making up this rule. This is an ancient human rule. The principle is, what's your homeland? Who are your people? Where are you from? That's part of where the whole African American nomenclature comes from. Oh, well, where are we home from? Our genes came from this place. We've been transported to this place, or we traveled to this place, but we understand we're visitors. And we could be accepted as long as we accept the rules of the people whose land it is, who've been there for 100 generations or more. That's your homeland, right? But conquerors have different ideas, right? So African democracy originated in the time before the pyramids and before cities. Cities is not just buildings, it's also building infrastructure beyond the natural environment to support your living there. So that might mean plumbing, that might mean a sewer system, that might mean agricultural fields, that might mean factory, that might mean things other than, huts. Okay? So in African democracy, every adult, and that adult was defined at 13 plus, after you successfully complete your rites of passage, had a voice in the government without restriction. Everyone. And then you were educated to participate in the community democracy. Everyone. Indigenous democracy, here in Turtle Island, insofar as evidence indicates, and evidence is in quotes because who accepts what evidence, right? So I'm just going to go with what the natives themselves say. Iroquois Six Nations, not because I like New York, but because I'm just giving credit for what they did, because of the quote-unquote American Founding Fathers kicking it with these folks, because the American Founding Fathers only knew a genetic aristocracy, kings, queens, nobles, who ruled because God said, well, we're fit to rule, and you are my property, you serfs. All right? So indigenous democracy, as late as 1100 in the Common Era, 1100 in the time period, the way of reckoning time that puts us in the 21st century. So 1100, probably before, given the evidence of cities. So I have a bias. Cities, citizens, that's where that word comes, live in cities, and civilization, and cities equals civilization, right? It's a bias, right? Every human being present, as well as unborn ancestors and natural and visible world, influence the government. So that phrase, Mexica Tawe in Aztec, which means all my relations, Mataquiase in Lakota, all my relations. Lots of native nations had this concept. All my relations doesn't just mean human beings. It just doesn't mean the human beings that are here. It means the ancestors. It means the unborn children. It also means the one-leggeds, the trees, the four-leggeds, the animals, fish, etc., etc. other things. All my relations means all my relations. In what I refer to as a quadrate unital logic, and we'll get into that when we get into Edwin Nichols' axiology construct. So, this democracy versus Greco-Roman democracy. The Native American forms of democracy and the African traditional forms of democracy both had the same features in that once you were an adult, you participated in the government, period. Didn't matter whether you were rich or poor, because, wait, we don't believe in rich or poor. Didn't matter how much land you had. Wait, we don't believe in real estate. The reason we don't believe in real estate is because you didn't create the land. You can only own that which you make with your own hands. You didn't make the land, God made the land. It ain't yours to sell. You can use it, but it ain't yours. I mean, that's an African tradition today. You know, one of your former students, you know, from outside of Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso said, yeah, you can come, you know, we'll give you a piece of land. You can't own it, but you can live there as long as you want. I may take him up on that for retirement. Who knows? But anyway, okay, so democracy. Nobody gets excluded because of who they sleep with, whether they're rich or poor. No homeless, no poor people. Because to have poor people, like, I mean, how many of you are parents? All right, well, I'm a parent, so you can relate to this statement. Which of your children do you not feed? Right? So you don't have poor people in these societies because why would you not feed your relatives if you've got food? Why shouldn't you share what is necessary? All right, so ethnic studies. So understand, when we're talking about why ethnic studies is now outside of the traditional canon and hasn't been included except for in the cases where students, me, you, have agitated for it. Like, tell me a larger story. Because the story matters. What you leave in and what you leave out. Politics is the science of power. Who has it? Who has it not? Who loses it? Who gains it? Guess I should have done my Yoda voice.
Who has it? Who has it not? Who loses it? Who gains it?
So who gets to define it? And who makes the rules? And so it's not as simple as the golden rule. That is, them that got the gold makes the rules. Okay, so why is it that gold miners don't make the rules? Maybe you didn't think about that, but why is it that gold miners don't make the rules? And why are the mine owners making the rules? Yeah, Eddie?
Exploitation,
Exploitation, sure.
capitalist system.
Okay. Yes. Not that that wouldn't happen if it were communist mine owners, because then it's the party members that get to make the money and the workers, the lumpen proletariat. So why is it that gold miners don't make the rules, and why are the mine owners making the rules? So Wade Nobles, who I quoted the other day, basically started the name of this class by saying, okay, understand about black people. We are not up from slavery. We are down from the pyramids.
Wade Nobles started this class?
He made a statement at a conference that I was at, you know, and I talked about him after because we're both black psychologists, right? Mm-hmm. So a lot of times we've studied Okay, so if you flip the script, what does then change? How does it change your thinking?
I just got to meet Wade Nobles like a couple weeks ago.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's cool.
yeah. So, right. So think about, yeah, wait. Slaves were smart. Slaves spoke multiple languages. So how does slavery improve black people if you go from being literate in 1 or 2 languages, speaking 5 languages, being able to do read and write and do math, and then you're captured as a slave and brought to America where they will kill you if you read, force you to speak English, and if you were like Muslim, force you to be Christian. But you can't read, even the Bible. Like, how is that an improvement? I'm missing something.
Not to mention we could survive in the wilderness. We could grow our own food.
Yeah, and make friends with the Indians, learn to speak their language, and you'd be accepted as part of the tribe. It's, yeah, right. How is that an improvement? Please, enlighten me.
Take a guy from with a business suit and send him to Africa and tell him to live in the wilderness. Yeah, civilized.
Yeah, so Wade once said, power is the ability to define reality so that others respond to your definition as if it were their own. Now, let me repeat that, because he did the first time I heard this from him. Power is the ability to define reality so that others respond to your definition as if it were their own. So if you understand, then politics is a science of power. Like, who has that power to define? So in ethnic studies, we'll call this the power of definition. Who writes the dictionary? Who defines what the meaning is? I mean, I've noticed in business meetings, okay, when before laptop computers were everywhere, you bring a computer to take notes, all of a sudden you're the note taker. You get to leave in what you want and leave out what you don't want. Computers are power. Okay, the power of definition. So, in this context, what Wade was also talking about, empowerment versus domination. Now, usually people are thinking about power as power over, domination. The conversation has been shaped so that you think of it that way. Power is the ability to define reality so that others respond to your definition as if it were their own. So there's 2 kinds of power then, at least. Power with, and there's a reason why, because I got the computer. Power with and power over. You're familiar with power over, because that's usually how it's done. But power with. That's also a form of power. Okay? So, empowerment, fun with language. Empowerment is power within mind. Or power within mind. I affirm the power within myself and within you. And neither of us is diminished. Okay? So, this is the power of a Buddha or a Christ. A Buddha or a Christ sees Christ sees Christ consciousness in you. Buddha sees Buddha nature in you. You might not. But because I recognize, and the only way you can recognize it in somebody else is if you got it. Okay, so I call out the Buddha or Christ consciousness in you, and I come forth. Come forward, my brother. Right? It's the same power I have as a drug counselor. I see the sober, recovered person inside the active, suffering addict, and I walk them to that path. I could say, sucks to be you. Take your kids away. No, here's how you can live without that stuff. In fact, you've been taught to depend on that stuff. It's a form of slavery, and you know how we feel about slavery. Addiction is slavery. And for black drug counselors, I mean, this is the context that I also met Wade in, because we were basically working on Afrocentric drug prevention. Okay? Black people already use drugs less than white people in America. And there's some cultural factors around that. So how do you keep them from using? Oh, here, you got a sense of mission. This kind of messes with your mind, kind of diffuses your focus. Don't mess with it. That's the simplified version, but anyway. So empowerment, power within mind. We're not up from slavery, we're down from the pyramids, okay? That's an empowerment statement.
That's where down from the pyramids.
Yeah, that's where down from the pyramids came from. Down from the pyramids, up from slavery. So, domination. I advantage myself to have power over you, particularly where you are more powerful. So then I psych you out. I get inside your head. Respect / power comes from the fear of potential or actual violence. Okay? This is how gang leadership works. The fear or threat of violence. You get jumped in. Okay? You put in work. Your loyalty is to the gang, not to the rest of society. Same with police. The police can be a gang. And so we often have to engage in that kind of double think, double thought. Get into that later. All right, so the fear or potential actual violence, the fear of domination. I advantage myself to have power over you, particularly where you are more powerful. Okay, so this is where it becomes deep. You can control people who are more powerful than you by instilling fear in them, fear of violence or whatever. But once they no longer care about dying, not in a way that they don't give an F, but in the way that, look, you killing my body does not end my spirit, does not even touch my spirit. Okay, there are people in South Africa fighting against apartheid who fought by singing. They were arrested and sentenced to death for singing hymns. And they went to their deaths by firing squad or hanging, singing. Once you no longer have the fear of death, you can no longer be controlled by fear. Even if they confine you. Oh, well, I'm still alive. This body's the prison. But once it's no longer the prison, you got nothing. That's scary to people. Right? So Wade also talks about this power domination like we were talking about in the logic thing, by basically imitating Columbus. I don't know who you are, but you Indians now. And what does that mean? Indios, like God made them. They're naked. They don't know weapons. With 50 men, I could enslave them. Yada, yada, yada. All that stuff from Columbus. Oh, we give you gold spear points because we think you're the good white brother from 2,800 years ago. Oh, wow, where'd you get the gold? Oh, well, these black guys gave it to us from south across the water. Wait, I'm the first. No, you're not, Chris. These black guys gave us this gold. And you find it out from a white dude, it's true. It's from Ghana. So the power of definition. This class is happening out of the social science department. So all science, this is the power of definition that I'm trying to be empowerment and basically saying, look, I ain't making this shit up to make black people feel good, okay? That is about that. Okay, is science. All science is the collection of facts and truths verified through replication. Science reflects the axiology of the culture that generated it. So in philosophy, if you've been exposed to Kant and Hegel and all those, you know that axiology is that discipline within philosophy that studies values. So axiology is the study of values in generic, traditional canon philosophy. But black people who are studied in the traditional canon will often flip the script on those definitions, especially if they don't work for us. Like Hegel doesn't work for us, because Hegel philosophizes that white supremacy is justified, not using a biblical reference, but, oh, well, we're demonstrably superior. Look at all the shit we got. Language and culture and, well, these savages, they live in grass huts. They can't really, their brains are smaller, they're inferior, you know, women, their wombs make them unable to have logical thoughts because they're so emotional. Like, tell me if I'm wrong about philosophy. I mean, is that their philosophy or not? Okay, and they reasonably, logically come to that, right? So, black people are going to flip the script. And so Edwin Nichols, a black industrial psychologist, says, okay, there are axiologies, there are people have axiologies, and to make it simple, I'm going to basically boil 4 billion, that's at the time that he first taught this, there's 7 billion people now, but 4 billion people down to 4 axiologies, not because the numbers relate to each other, but it's simple. Because he's basically saying, look, if I were going to do this the real way, we'd spend a week immersed in each culture so you could see what I'm talking about. But corporate America ain't going to pay for longer than 2 days. Okay, based on their axiology. They're not going to do that. So, boom. If I'm going to present this to a company, they're going to have to see how to make their diverse workforce work. And that's why he came up with this construct called axiology, which is the philosophical culture of values. And basically he says, okay, there's Euro-American axiology, there's Afro-Hispanic axiology, there's Asian axiology, and there's Native American axiology. So, science reflects the axiology of the culture that generated it. Okay, so Nichols will say there's broadly 4. So right there, you see there could be a problem potentially in that boiling down 7 billion people to 4 axiologies would be problematic. Right? And he acknowledges that. Look, it gets more complicated than that. But, for example, and when we get into axiology, we'll see that you'll show that. So, take for example the science of anthropology. That's in the traditional canon. Western anthropology focuses on the study of culture through artifacts. Okay? Archaeology and the etic. So etic is outside the culture, study of culture and belief. So, this artifact, this water bottle, curiosity and resistance, diversity is critical to thinking, was a TEDx talk at the University of Oregon, February 9th, 2013. So, the culture that produced this steel water bottle is a particular culture. This steel water bottle reflects the values of the culture that manufactured it. Right? So anthropology is like a science out of that same axiology. Okay? We're going to study other cultures, but our study of other cultures is going to prove how our culture is superior. Those cultures are interesting, but ours is superior. All right? And that was our, anthropology. Oh, look at these primitive artifacts. Look at these bowls. Look at these, arrow points. Look at these. That's the evidence. Coming out of the axiology of Euro-Americans, in which the highest axiology, the highest value, is the object in control of the artifact. Right? So Western anthropology then, of course, until postmodernism, that is after World War II, did not study itself. In other words, with Western civilization. That was considered crazy until some postmodernists like Foucault, among others, said, we kind of need to look at this position of superiority that we think we have, because it ain't working, as evidenced by World War II. We think we're superior? Not so much. So, in terms of peace, Hotep, the African American experience is like habanero or ghost peppers. Yum. If you're used to salt and pepper, it could be a little intense. But you can get used to that level of intensity. Breathe through it. Remember, we're the same people. Phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny, which I'll explain shortly. Okay? The species origin, phylogeny, is reflected in the beginnings of the individual. That's ontogeny. The many are one. Each individual, you, came from two separate cells, which became many. Phylogeny recapitulates ontogeny. So, dictionary definition, phylogeny, or phylogenesis, the development over time of a species, genus, or group, as contrasted with the development of an individual, ontogeny, and then ontogeny, the development of an individual from a fertilized ovum to maturity as contrasted with the development of a group or species. What we didn't necessarily get into. So, ontology, the most general branch of metaphysics concerned with the nature of being. Where do we come from? What are our origins? A particular theory of being. So, you best get friendly with a dictionary. Paper dictionary is best, but that's my bias. Okay, so this is from one of the books that we first built the class on. African thought is conditioned by their ontology. That is, their theory of the nature of being. Ontology, and as part of metaphysics, is a study of the nature of being. Being is a process, a series of energetic relationships. All right, so this is coming from a 21st century quantum view. All right? Your devices, cell phones, are quantum devices. Bet you didn't know that. Did you know that? They're quantum devices. Okay? So, according to quantum physics, where the basic scientific principles of cell phones were discovered 150 years ago. Right? But we had to go through, and I'm old enough to remember this. I'm old enough to remember when there were 3 television stations, and televisions were only black and white, and only rich people had colored. But even those color televisions had 3 channels: ABC, NBC, and CBS.
They went off late at night, right?
Yeah, they went off like after like about 1 or 2 in the morning too. Right. And then you had PBS, or public television, and UHF, ultra high frequency. But it wasn't broadcast, you know, through that, right? And telephones were rotary telephones. Okay? Dial tone. You could talk as long as you wanted, but if somebody was trying to call you, they'd just get a busy tone. No call waiting, no caller ID, no screen, no nothing. Right? Telephones over wires. Had to have wires. Now, landlines, as you know them now. In order to get to cell phones, we had to go through wired telephones and build up the technology so that it's basically the same principle. Instead of a wire, we have a cell tower that sends a signal that basically connects you anywhere on the planet, so connected at the speed of light. Only slowed down by transmission towers, but basically the speed of light. So you're connected in 5 seconds to everything. Well, quantum physics says that's already happening. In fact, your separation by space and time is an illusion. Actually, the physical plane itself is an illusion. This isn't solid. It's actually energy. The reason you can't walk through the wall is because the probability patterns in the wall are hard to compress. Come again? You mean the reason I'm not falling through the floor is because the probability patterns between my feet and the floor are hard to compress, so I can't walk through it? But if I could basically see the energy like the Matrix, I could just like stop bullets and shit. Okay. All right. For them, being is a process, not a mere state, and the nature of things is thought of in terms of force or energy rather than matter. The forces of the spirit, human, animal, vegetable, and mineral worlds are all constantly influencing each other, and by a proper knowledge and use of them, a man may influence his own life and that of others. Okay, so this is a deeper level of empowerment, where how you become royal, how you become powerful is by recognizing your connection within yourself and teaching that to others. How you would control others is by denying them knowledge of that deeper connection. And this is part of, to the degree that you are culturally literate and you've seen the Matrix movies, if you understood that the Matrix movies were written by a black woman who was basically simply trying to create a black superhero, basically using the Bible as a template, understanding, black people wrote the Bible, so the first movie, the Old Testament is the past, the New Testament is the now, and the future is Revelations. So that's why, in her universe, and basically her contention is that the Matrix and the Terminator movies were basically her creation, and they were basically stolen and made into 2 separate lines. So basically her idea was that Neo was John Connor, and that John Connor was living in the future, which was ruled by computers got out of control and subjugated humanity. And so this guy had to move back in time to wake other people up. So there was a group of people that was waking him up, i.e. Morpheus and the Sentinels, et cetera, et cetera. That's why Zion is multiracial, and that's why the agents in the Matrix are all white. Notice there are no black agents? Notice that the people in Zion are multiracial? you think white people would think like that? Where would that storyline come from? And she basically actually won a case saying that, yeah, this was copyright infringement. Look, I wasn't interested in money, just, you stole my idea, so come clean about that. But the idea is, behind that is this, right? How does Neo overcome? Oh, you kill what I think is my body, but my spirit is independent of my body, and so I'm going to come back. And the machine can't understand that. Machines can't understand choice. Why is the Oracle a black woman? Right, I mean, that's the idea. I mean, it's not just archetypal imagery. There's, that kind of meme. The idea is, oh, we have the forces that appear to be separate, human, animal, vegetable, and mineral, are all constantly influencing each other. All my relations. This is the same construct in Native American. Or many indigenous people have this idea that these forces are interacting with each other. So yoga came out of Africa. It was called Sema Tawi, which is basically the union of the higher and lower self, or the Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. Upper Egypt is the spirit, Lower Egypt is the body. This is a yogin though we basically knew of it here through its introduction through India. This is the 0 point. And the 0 point, if you're going to be, as they often say in yogic disciplines, one-pointed, the 0 point, the point is the top of the pyramid. It's invisible. And the circle is visible manifest creation. So if you were at the goal of spiritual discipline or yoga, is to place yourself in meditation at that 0 point, and then by controlling your mind, body, you manifest reality. And becomes about self-mastery. And it's at this point where nobody can touch you. Because you recognize, oh, I don't cease to exist with the destruction of my body any more than my body ceases to exist because I lose my hoodie. So, to be one-pointed is to be at the start of creation before it becomes visible. And the 0 point is the top of the pyramid where visible creation begins. So think of it like the kind of clear pond before the stone is dropped. Then the stone's dropped and the ripples move out. In fact, within certain forms of meditation, we actually teach people, think of your thoughts as ripples on a pond, and we'll give you a mantra to basically clear out all the other thoughts until thoughts themselves disappear. Then you see who you really are, or you begin to see who you really are. And if you practice that, you acquire a certain power within mind that makes you beyond most forms of social control based on fear and domination. Become truly dangerous. So, thoughts are the ripples. So why you do this is basically the first steps to self-mastery. And the pyramids are a symbol of that. Not just a tomb. Okay? That's from the anthropological point of view. Oh, these must be tombs. No. They're not. But you can see why you might think that. The Sphinx symbolizes mind over material. Let me adjust this. Save it 20. Yeah, there we go. Sphinx symbolizes mind over material, spirit over matter, self-mastery within the physical world, using breath as a key. So you'll witness in this class disturbing things. That's why the habanero and ghost pepper analogy. You will have your mind blown. You may have to reorder your sense of reality. But pay attention to your experience. So diunital logic. In axiology, that is the indigenous form of logic for Africans. Dichotomous logic is the post-Dark Ages, male-dominant, Romanized Christian section of Euro-American culture. And the reason I define it that way is because Euro-Americans weren't always like they are today. Some of them had egalitarian, or where men and women were equal, societies, where women controlled the important technologies. I mean, as a drug counselor, I study this. So, for example, Irish form of alcohol. Irish what?
Whiskey.
How do you spell whiskey in Gaelic?
Don't know that.
Ah. Whiskey in Gaelic. Whiskey. Whiskey. Or Scotch. Whiskey and Scotch are made from? Okay, fine, you're not drinkers. Grain, just like beer, right? Okay, maybe you didn't know that either, but I'm a drug counselor, I study this stuff. So, they're made from grains. What else do you make with grain? Bread. Okay, so, when the wise women, as they were called, okay, who controlled the drug technology, not only, grain, etc., it's how to make herbs, what herbs were healing, which herbs are poison, etc., delivering babies, midwives, all that kind of stuff. That indigenous egalitarian technology, right? So they made a rule. Nobody makes whiskey until everybody has bread first. Who would make a rule like that, men or women? Duh. Okay, right? So part of that, just like in Native America, where they knew 4,000 years ago that alcohol hurt the fetus, so pregnant women and little kids shouldn't be drinking it, these wise women had the same value and basically said, okay, nobody makes whiskey until everybody has bread first. Okay, so you put some limits, therefore you limit the amount of addiction and health problems. Make sense? Real simple policy. What happens when you burn 9 million women like that as witches? What happens to the knowledge if they didn't write it down?
Up in smoke.
Up in smoke, right. So then you get the Puritans coming to America and giving rum to 4-year-olds to put them to sleep. Can you do that today? Then that was normal behavior. Giving rum to 4-year-olds. I know none of you are parents, but I mean, okay, really?
I've
seen it happen.
Okay, sure. But it's illegal. We don't allow that for the very 21st century scientific reason of drug tolerance. If you start a 4-year-old off with rum, a couple of shots of rum to knock them out, like not that they're measuring then, right? What you're doing is conditioning them to a certain drug tolerance that by the time they're adults in their culture, like 14, they are raging alcoholics. Now remember, this is the 1600s. So we don't even have a concept of addiction yet. We don't believe in germ theory. In fact, there would be no germ theory in Western medicine until the mid-1800s. So think about that. They don't believe in germs, don't exist. I mean, they have microscopes so they know that the little microscopic animals, but they don't connect the dots with these things are causing disease and you've got to wash your hands and all that kind of stuff. But the midwives are doing that. Anyway, Puritans are giving rum to 4-year-olds. 4-year-olds grow up, and if the example that you had with child rearing is spare the rod, spoil the child, because that came from your version of the Bible, and the kid got beat for discipline and saw dad beat mom while drunk, what do you think the kid gonna do? All right, so not to impose my drug counts. I mean, this is history. I'm not making up. This is what the state of Oregon taught me to teach beginning drug counselors. So if white folks are saying this is our history and it's not very cool, but look how far we've come, kinda, sorta. Let's bring some science into here, right? And the reason I'm going off about this, from diunital logic, okay? Dichotomous logic. Oh, spare the rod, spoil the child. So, the rule of thumb. That is, you can beat your wife and child as long as the stick that you use is no thicker than your thumb. That was the English common law and was law here, too, because the English brought it with them. Native Americans are going, whoa, these white folks, they're like drinking fire water, and they're beating their wives and children. Like, wow, that ain't cool. No wonder their women are leaving them to come to us. No, that's why the Wall Street Wall got built on Wall Street. Ostensibly, it's to keep the Indians out, but wait, you're on an island in Indian country. The Indians are surrounding you. You think that's going to keep them out? The wall across Manhattan? That's to keep white women and black people and white men from escaping into Indian country. That's what the wall really is about. Really, not making that up. But think about that context. So the reason I went off on a whole Puritan thing, the Puritan ethic, is okay. The natives around them are saying, no, you don't give this to 4-year-olds or anybody. Maybe in our ceremonies we'll drink wine, but not to intoxication. Because you don't want to lose your head. You don't want to lose your connection to the spirit. But a little buzz is okay during a ceremony, but no, we don't want people getting drunk, and we don't want our kids or pregnant women getting drunk either. But these folks, the Puritans, are doing that because the people that could have stopped them, the witches, got burned because of a set of beliefs generated by, among other things, the King James Version of the Bible, a certain worldview. Notice how then certain beliefs become policy, become law. So you have to examine where they came from. Yeah, Eddie.
It's all kind of a version of information control.
Yeah.
Which gives those empowered power.
Yeah. So dichotomous logic, Euro-American logic is basic. This is post-indigenous and basically Romanized, male-dominant Christian, where basically it says you have opposites, plus, minus. Those are opposites, right? So if you're going to put a value on plus minus, plus is
Positive.
positive, negative, good, bad, if you're going to put gender on this, where does it line up?
Female's negative, male's positive.
Okay? If you're going to talk about strength, how does it line up? Who's strong? Who's weak? Rational? You see how this lines up now? Dichotomous logic. Okay? Check out the dictionary. And you'll see it. I mean, I can actually do a piece where we're illustrating this. I mean, if you saw the Malcolm X movie, you know, that section where the brother is teaching how to check out the dictionary, good, bad, male, female, black, white, boom, boom, boom. How does it line up? Dichotomous logic. Dichotomy, di means two, chotomy, basically against each other. Now, it is a lot, so logic, in this sense, is a means of reasoning to an answer. The answer doesn't have to be true. It just has to be consistent with the logic. I know, this is like a disconnect, no, but think about it. If guys had to go through labor and squeeze out a baby's head through a hole that's like less than half the baby's size head, and go through labor and squeeze that out, like we die. Okay, so strength, if strength is measured in how much pain you can take, think about that. Who's stronger, who's weak, whatever, right? Intelligence, you know, rational, well, you know, you can do all kinds of different measures. So, dichotomous logic. So, diunital logic. Back to slide, please. Diunital logic. The union of opposites. The simplification of complexities, and also recognition that there's complexities in the simple. And that's African logic. Right? So the idea of the Adinkra symbols as an alphabet. Oh, let's capture thought in a symbol. But we're not going to write sentences. We're going to show you the symbol, and that's going to remind you of a larger story. And you just have to, we'll teach you the larger story. But there's always a larger story, even what appears to be simple. And sometimes to break down a complex thing, you have to use a story to capture many of the elements in it. So there's a black gay science fiction writer, one of my favorite. Wrote a book called Empire Star, in which he basically introduces a concept, simplex, complex, multiplex. Now, I actually looked up multiplex in a dictionary. It's in there. It's like 150 years old before Delaney used it, right? And he teaches English at, you know, UMass and Amherst. So part of some of his characters, right? So simplex, when I talked about Monday, the hero is the teller of the tale. That's basically what Delaney would call simplex, complex, multiplex. Okay? Simplex, the surface of the story. Complex, below the surface of the story. And multiplex, multiple dimensions of the story that keep unfolding. But in order sometimes to tell the story, like in this particular story, Empire Star, it's like a novella, there's a civilization that is built around the center of power, around an actual star But in his book, the star has 7 stars orbiting around a single gravitational point. The actual star has 3, but he says 7. So what those 7 stars do at the center, they rip time and space in a precise, predictable manner, so that if you know the mathematics of it, you can enter today and emerge Wednesday 150 years ago. And then you can alter the time stream to keep you in power. And so there's only a few minds that can actually do that and stay sane. He posits there's a race of slaves, or a race of people that are slaves. They're not human, but basically they're like humans. They're called the Lil. And the Lil are capable of there's been a war that's killed like 100 billion people. So the Lil are capable of rebuilding a planet from the physical infrastructure as well as all the religions and philosophies that existed on that planet, given the information. Each one. So think about a being that's capable of rebuilding an entire planet, an entire Earth, by themselves, with everything that was there. Not only the physical infrastructure, but also the religions, the culture, the art, the music. One person. And in order to own them as slaves, you have to experience this incredible sadness. Who knows what they feel, but if you own one of them, they'll only work while you're awake. And while you're awake, you have to experience this incredible sadness. And the more you have working for you, that sadness multiplies. It could drive you insane, right? From a certain point of view. And so part of the story is basically someone, this very simplex kid is actually the person that's going to be liberating or bringing the message to free the Lil. But in order to do that, he has to be educated to be able to enter into space. And in Delaney's book, the spacemen speak in Old English. These and thous, okay, really, hyperspace. But you're speaking in Old English. I mean, that's the kind of, right, a slave, but the slave can rebuild a planet. And they can only work while you feel their pain. And you have to be awake. I mean, who would think of that? But a black guy, right? A black gay, whoa, okay. Blows my mind. But, to use that analogy, simplex, complex, and multiplex is reflected in what Bernard Fagg talked about that's his name, Bernard Fagg talked about ontology in Africans, right? There's a relationship between all this stuff. We deep. So, simplex. Here's an example. So there's a constellation. So simplex. Constellation, an identifiable two-dimensional pattern of stars. Okay, so you know that constellations in the sky are not a flat picture, right? I mean, you kind of know that, but maybe you haven't thought about the implications, really. All right? But let's start with the simplex. A constellation, an identifiable two-dimensional pattern of stars. Almazan is the name of this particular constellation in the original culture that named all the stars. Okay, which is Arabic. But this is actually, when this got named, it was before Islam. Not much before Islam, but Islam existed before Muhammad. Okay, it did. And Islam says that too. But Almazan, the scales. The Chinese call it the starry plow. Native Americans called it the big bear, great bear, or named in Greek Ursa Major, right? Because bears had a long tail, and there's a whole story in Native American mythology about how the bear lost his tail, ice fishing, the fish bit his tail off, so now all bears have short tails now. Whatever, I'm not making it up, but that's the story, right? And also Big Dipper in African American, and Big Dipper in American culture, and the drinking gourd in African American culture. Okay? Same name, same constellation, different names, different set of stories. So that's the simplex view. The complex view. The stars in the constellation are named in Arabic. In the story of the naming, they're part of a funeral cart pulling the body of a hero who was killed by the evil represented by what we call the pole star Polaris, which they call Al-Qibla. So evil enters the universe through Al-Qibla, through the pole star, which we call the North Star in this particular piece. So that's a little bit more of the story. So all the stars march in mourning or on guard to watch for and prevent evil's return. So, who put scales in the sky and what would they measure? There's a reason why I'm going through this. But you kind of figured, you got my smoke already, right? You know that I'm going somewhere with this. Who put scales in the sky and what would they measure? Who put scales in the sky? Let's start there.
A superior being.
A superior being,
Of
God.
some sort.
Right, okay? And what would they measure if it's a scale? What do scales measure on Earth? Weights and different things. But okay, if you're God, what are you measuring?
Justice could be.
Justice, yes. Good.
Like in our legal system, same use of the scales.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that meme was handed down from these folks, yes. So, Operation Infinite Justice, remember that? Y'all are old enough to remember that. Okay, the Iraq War. Bush called it Operation Infinite Justice, and the Arab world just like went, what? Oh no. No, you didn't. Why? Oh, America, you think you're God? Oh, they're already paranoid about America thinking that they're God already. Right? From the Columbus discovered America narrative and bringing democracy to the world and blah, 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 blah. No. So you understand the difference between the stories and the cosmology they represent. Understanding the implication of the stories is explaining a place and relationship to the universe. The fact that stories change over time, even as the apparent two-dimensional picture changes. Oh, by the way, I forgot. There's something I skipped. So this star is an English rendering of an Arabic word which in Arabic, like its sister languages Hebrew, Amharic, and Aramaic, a single word can have multiple meanings. That word Al-Qaid, which is spelled anglicized, but you could also spell with A-L-Q-U-E-D, Al-Qaeda, means it means the commander. It means the base of the fortress wall that protects us within the commander. It also means the code that we live by. Okay, and remember, Al-Qaeda is basically circling to make sure that evil doesn't come back into the universe. Okay, so Operation Infinite Justice, wait, you're saying that you're God bringing back into justice, and no, we ain't buying that. And so the principal opponent is going to be Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda. So if you didn't know that backstory, and certainly Bush didn't know that backstory,
Because, no, you don't call it that.
Just on principle, that make a lot of people mad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right, and Americans, of course, didn't understand that, and so here's a backstory way of, look, check out this, because I learned this from a Palestinian. Because, we were playing basketball, and, I was in the extra hardwood, and he was trying to move me, and no, I ain't moving. He says, "You're like a rock." And I said, what is that in your language? And he goes, "Al-Qaeda." What? No. Really? Al-Qaeda? Because you can't make an inside move against me and I ain't moving? A rock. So what else does it mean? So, that's the meaning, right? Yeah,
Do you
Eddie.
think that backstory has been consciously suppressed from the American public?
Well, it's like why people don't know that they're balancing their checkbooks with Arabic numbers. Or they don't know that algebra means the mending and it's not about just computation, it's about healing. Okay, algebra means the mending. So the image, so part of, African logic, symbolic imagery and rhythm. Okay, so symbols meaning multiple things, words meaning multiple things, right? So the image in algebra is a stick that's broken and the equal signs in the middle. So to unite the stick, what you do to this side, you got to do the other side. What you do above, you got to do below. And in order of operations, right? PEMDAS, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, you have to do the hardest thing first. And if you do the hardest thing first, then you'll arrive at the correct answer. Start with the hardest thing first. So it's not just computation. It's problem solving on a spiritual level to arrive at a place of justice. The enemy of my enemy is my friend. Why would I start with my enemy? Well, they're your enemy, but they have enemies too. You need to know their history and the history of their enemy and the history of your people so to see where you can arrive at a correct resolution of peace. That's hard, but you got to do that first. If you don't do that first, everything falls apart. Okay, you see how this is tying in? Right? So, that backstory is erased from the traditional canon. It's like the first Muslim congressman got sworn into office using Thomas Jefferson's Quran. Wait, why does Thomas Jefferson have a Quran? Because the first country to recognize the fledgling United States was Morocco. And he's a well-read dude, so, okay, what are these Mohammedans, what do they think? What do they believe? Oh, they believe that, Isa, their word for Jesus, was a Rasul too, like a messenger of God. Okay, yeah, we revere Isa and Musa, Moses, etc., and the other Rasuls that came before Muhammad, but Muhammad's the last one. So don't be dissing Muhammad. Right? They just killed those people in that magazine in Paris because, of a satirical thing, right? Different cultural values in Europe around that. We don't put down our religious figures. And you should understand, freedom of the press, they go off you. So, multiplex. What appears to be two-dimensional, that is a flat picture, is a multidimensional relationship, which changes according to our awareness. The space between the stars is not just empty space. It's filled with energy. Dark matter, all manner of things beyond our sense perception, but then it is perceivable by our instruments to the degree that we can measure stuff. And that goes with the science. Can we measure it? Can you repeat the measurement? Can other people using the same methodology get it? So our simplex view was only our simplex view, not necessarily reality. Okay, which is always not always so simple. So this from National Geographic, I'll give them. So Earth is on screen left, and it basically shows you the physical relationships between the stars in that constellation. So just point out to you what appears to be opposites, Alkaid and Dubby. Okay, so the lip of the dipper and the tip of the handle of the dipper, what appear to be in the constellation farthest apart, are actually closer to each other in space than any of the others are to Earth. Now, I wrote a piece which got rejected by the faculty magazine. Basically, I was talking about Al-Qaeda and W. From Al-Qaeda to W to Al-Qaeda to W. I was basically making the point, you know, George W. Bush and Osama bin Laden are not all that different. The Bush family was in business with the bin Laden family. With Osama's daddy. The Bush family is still in business with the bin Laden family. So while the rest of us were grounded after the fall of the Twin Towers, the bin Laden family in the United States were being gathered up and sent away from interrogation before they could be interrogated by the FBI. So are the bin Ladens our enemy or just one of them? And this is not the first time the Bush family has been dealing with the enemy, by the way. But they didn't like that statement. Just saying, oh, we're ahistorical. Oh, we are not ahistorical. Well, yeah, there's a history to bin Laden and where he came from and his family. And we have a relationship with them. So why do you think you fly all this family out of the country before you can interrogate them? Think, hey, yo, where's your brother? Where's your cousin? Think that'd be a strategic interest? Yeah. Got a question? All right. So, Al-Qaeda and W appear to be the farthest away, but actually they're closer than each is to Earth. Al-Qaeda is 206 light years, W is 106. And the closest star is 60 light years away. So, economically at least, Al-Qaeda's bin Laden and W are closer to each other than either of them is to any of us. But, again, this is ethnic studies. So we basically talk about a story that's different than the traditional canon or what mainstream media might talk about. And that there's historical interactions. So we'll continue this more Monday. This will be up later on the Moodle site as well as the video. See you later.
Everyone goes up.
Yeah.
That's so nice. That's so nice. Thank you.
How do I find this out online?
What?
How do I find the
Are you enrolled?
Yeah.
Okay, so everybody's enrolled.
But I don't know.
So everybody's enrolled. So